Welcome, everybody. On behalf of Holocaust Museum LA, my name is Michael Morgenstern, and I work with our education department at the museum. This early afternoon, you have the honor and privilege of listening to David Lenga, a Holocaust survivor who will share his story with you. And afterwards, you'll have the opportunity to ask him questions. Those watching on Zoom can type your questions in the Q&A box, and those watching on Facebook can type in the comments, and we'll get through as many questions as possible. Before we begin, I would like to share a few quick words about the museum. Our museum was founded in the early 1960s by a group of Holocaust survivors who wanted to make sure this history would never be forgotten. In the early 1960s, most survivors were by and large not yet ready to face this tragic history. Thanks to the courage and foresight of the survivors who founded our museum, we now have what became the first Holocaust museum in the country, always with the mission to commemorate, educate, and inspire future generations. We cannot do this work today without our survivor community and David and so many others who volunteer their time to speak to audiences and groups on a regular basis, especially to student groups every day of the school year. David, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are honored to have you for this virtual talk. And I would also like to remind everybody that the museum is now open, but for the time being, our public programs are still virtual. And David, we thank you so much for joining us for this Summer Friday Survivor Speaker Series. You may begin. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It is an honor and privilege to talk to large audiences on the subject of the Holocaust. And one of the most important things we have to understand is that the subject of the Holocaust may belong to history, but it is a history which unfortunately keeps on repeating itself in many different guises. And we, the survivors like myself, we can see those signs when they happen, because the Holocaust, Auschwitz, all the other horrible places associated with the Holocaust, they did not happen overnight. It is not something that came spontaneously. It was built up over a long period of time with rhetoric and with a plan to annihilate the Jewry of Europe. It was a racist, horrible policy that was perpetrated upon the Jewish people. But as I said, it was very carefully planned. Now, I have survived 6 years of living hell during the war. And for me, the war started exactly on September the 1st, 1939, because I witnessed the start of this war. It was what Germany called a blitzkrieg. I was 11 years old on September the 1st, 1939. I had a younger brother by the name of Nathan. He was 4 years younger than me. We were just two boys in our family, my mom and dad, I and my brother. My father was a manufacturer. We had a tannery in a small town north of the city of Lodz, where we were born, where we lived. And that town's name was Strykow. And my father was well known there because he was the biggest employer in that city. And so on September the 1st, 1939, I found myself going on an errand for my parents on a streetcar. And within 15 minutes of the ride of that streetcar, the sirens of the city started blaring alarmingly. And all the adults, of course, knew what that meant. It meant imminent danger. So everything stopped in its tracks. All the vehicles, the cars, everybody that did anything stopped cold in its tracks and ran for cover because we didn't know where the danger is coming from. But we knew it is dangerous. And within seconds almost, before we had a chance to get out of the streetcar, an armada of German planes descended upon the city, upon the streets of Lodz, city of Lodz, and they were machine gunning mercilessly, indiscriminately into the crowd, into the civilian population. Immediately, I witnessed mayhem and a slaughterhouse in front of me. I witnessed body parts flying, people screaming, yelling, running for cover to adjacent buildings. Everybody was looking for shelter, not to get killed. Nobody understood what was happening because it was so sudden. I ran in for cover as well in one of the buildings, and I didn't dare to go even home with the main streets because I wasn't sure that this armada is not going to come back. That lasted for a long time, maybe half an hour. Having witnessed this horrible beginning of the war and not understand much of it, I ran home through rooftops, through fences, through backyards, to alleys. I did not want to be seen. I did not want to go to the main streets. It was too dangerous. It took me a long time, but I came eventually home, and my father pulled me in. All the windows were shut in the middle of the day. I didn't understand. It looked very strange. And what happens was my parents already knew of the attack because they listened to the radio. And the radio told them of that sudden attack on Poland. And we all knew that this was the beginning of World War II. Hitler unleashed on Poland a blitzkrieg, a lightning war, and it was a shock to the nation and a shock to the world, and particularly a shock to the Jewish people, because we all knew from reading the Mein Kampf or hearing the stories about what the Mein Kampf contained. It was Hitler's book, Mein Kampf. And in that book, he made no bones about what he intends to do with the Jewish people. He wants to eliminate the Jewish people from the face of the earth. It was a race policy that he implemented with the help of thousands, maybe millions of other Germans, civilian population. Within days of this attack, the German army marched into Poland with heavy motorized units, with tanks, with guns, with machine guns, with heavily clad soldiers, SS, and immediately, the persecution of the Jewish people started. In the meantime, the very first few days, the hunger set in because the Polish money became worthless. The farmers refused to sell. The stores closed their doors. They were hoarding the food. And the civilian population started to feel the pinch of the hunger. And people were bartering with each other. They were trying to get any amount of food for their families, for themselves. It was a difficult time. Kitchens were formed, long lines of people standing to be dealt out a little bit of food on rations. And amidst all this horror, the Germans unleashed their German youth, the Hitlerjugend, with swastikas, armbands, with brown shirts, roaming the city of Lodz and the streets of Poland and rounding up randomly Jewish men and placing placards on their chest that says, I am a criminal, I am a thief, I committed a crime. And they erected gallows on many plazas that forced the civilian population to stand and watch how innocent men and women were hung in public view. And I had to witness that at the age of 11. The impact this made on me is beyond words. It scarred my conscience and my heart and my soul, and something that I will never forget. After this spectacle, what we saw, this horror, within days, a Jeep stopped in front of our house. 3 soldiers with machine guns came out, they walked straight to our door in my house where we lived in Lodz, Poland, and they knocked on the door fiercely, screaming in German, Aufmachen, aufmachen, open up, open up. My mom and I, my brothers, clung to my mom's skirt. We were little children. We were scared to death, and so was my mom. And my father was very stoic. He spoke a good German. He was an educated man. He went to the front door, opened up, and he says to the soldiers, Jawohl, was kann ich für ihr tun? Okay, what can I do for you? And one of them said, are you Abraham Lenga? And he said, yes. You come with us immediately. And without any ado, they just took him away. He turned, before he left, he turned to my mom and he said, Sarah, take care of the children. I'll be back as soon as I can. They took him to the headquarters of the Gestapo. They interrogated him briefly, and they told him in no uncertain terms, we are here to tell you, they said, that we know you're the owner of the factory at Strykow, and from this moment on, you are no longer the owner of that factory. That factory has been confiscated, taken over by the German government, by the Third Reich. But you are ordered to work for the German Reich in that factory. You put it in motion. You hire the labor from among the Jews of Strykow. You will be resettled there, and you will produce leather and fur and clothing for the German army. That is an order. And my father realized the futility of protesting. So he says, but I need to take my family with me if I have to go there. And so they granted him his wish. And 3 days later, a Jeep came and loaded us up, me, my brother, my mom, my dad, and my grandma that lived with us. And they took us away to the city of Strykow. We were taken away from our residence without being allowed to take anything other than the shirt on our back. We were scared to death because we didn't know what is next. In Strykow, we were assigned a house that was emptied out, taken over from someone else that we don't know. And we were ordered that this is going to be our residence to live while we produce the goods for the Germans. And so for 2 years, we were slaving. A ghetto was erected on the Jews of Strykow because they didn't have time yet to erect fences or walls, but they made a perimeter and made everybody know what that perimeter is within which we could live. We may not get out from that perimeter without military permission. And so my father realized the situation, and he prevailed by the commander that he needs to have labor force in order to produce all what they're asking for. So he hired 50% more people that he actually needed, because he knew that as long as you are working for the Germans, then you are allowed to stay alive. If you are no longer working, your life may be in great danger. So he hired 50% more men than he needed, and he saved their lives, at least temporarily, while they worked there. After 2 years, a lot of things happened in Europe that we were unaware of. Militarily, the Germans suffered great defeats. In the East, especially in Russia, in Stalingrad, Leningrad, and Moscow. And they adjusted their policies by eliminating all these small ghettos from around Poland and consolidated the labor force by throwing in the able-bodied men and women into larger ghettos that were already established. And so they ordered all the residents, after 2 years of labor there, they ordered all the residents to report to the cemetery, to the Jewish cemetery in Strykow. There they kept us for 3 days and 3 nights without food, without water, without hygiene, without a mean to even alleviate oneself. It was living hell that I witnessed. My father was at that time extremely sick. He had double pneumonia. And when they made the raid and they lined up the people and they sorted out men from women, separated families, and they told the able-bodied people to go to the right for labor, and the ones that they considered no longer able-bodied to the left to die. Myself, my mom, my brother, and my grandma, we were thrown into the Lodz Ghetto. My dad and the other men were taken away. I did not believe that my dad could make it another day. That's how sick he was. And my mom told me at that time, she says, David, I got to tell you, I don't believe your father is going to survive the night. That is how sick he is. They took him away, and throughout the war, I never saw him again. I presumed that he's dead. So here I find myself in the ghetto of Lodz, which was in 1942 fully established. It had tremendous fenced in walls, electric wires, guards at every few feet with heavily machine gun weapons trained on the population of the ghetto. And the ghetto was in 1942 already established enough that they could create industries, light industries. And they converted the largest hospital in the city of Lodz into a manufacturing plant, a clothing manufacturing plant. My uncle, my father's oldest brother, that also was in the ghetto, he was put in charge of that factory because he was a very well-known couturier before the war, who was known for his wonderful fashions that he designed for the who was who. And so they made him the head of that factory. And everyone that lived in the ghetto had to work. If you don't work, you don't get rations, you don't eat, you starve. The starvation diet that they gave us, even at the best of times, was so insufficient that people died of starvation, actually, especially children. And during those 2 years, my mom prevailed with my uncle to take me into the factory and teach me a trade. She said to him, she says, David is only 11 years old. He cannot go to school anymore. He cannot be educated. What is going to become of him? He needs to learn something to stand on his own feet. So she said to him, she says, Gil, please take care of my boy. Teach him at least a trade to become a tailor. So one day, maybe he could stand on his own feet. So my uncle took me under his wings, and I worked there for 2 years. It was hard labor because it was long hours, but I was young. I learned quickly, and my uncle taught me every facet of cloth making and design. And by the time I was 15, 16 years old, I was a full-fledged tailor. I had a trade, a profession in my hand, which was rare at that age. But during that time in the ghetto, I witnessed horrors that are beyond description what the Germans did. They not only made constant raids, sifting through the population, the able-bodied from what they considered no longer able-bodied, but the people that remained there even working were constantly starving to death. I witnessed dead bodies being loaded up naked on lorries and pulled not by horses, but by men in the ghetto, outside of the ghetto to pits that were bodies were thrown in and burned alive. And I witnessed this on a daily basis when children were dying on the street with swollen bellies. It was a horror that I went through myself, that I witnessed with my eyes, that impressed and burned marks on my soul, scars that are still there today. I'm talking about it because I want people to know what Nazism did to innocent people, what fascism and what nationalism has accomplished during World War II. The horrors were unbelievable. While all this was going on, and we were kept in the dark, the outside world knew what was happening in German Nazi occupation areas. They knew because there were reporters, there were people that were bringing out the news, there were pictures, there were all kinds of news coming out from different sources, from the underground, and the entire world sat there, looked on, listened and knew, and were mum. Even the Vatican was completely mum. They assumed a stance of deafening silence. And by so doing, they gave Hitler the green light to go ahead and do his nefarious work. That is why we, the survivors, are holding that world co-responsible for what happened. But life has to go on. And in 1944, the Germans suffered exactly great losses again. On the Eastern Front, there was a breakthrough evidently, and the Russians were coming in great numbers, marching westward towards Germany, towards Poland and Germany. And the Germans decided that the situation is untenable, and they decided to eliminate the ghetto of Lodz and to disassemble the machinery of the industry and transport it back to Germany proper, and take the labor, the Jews that were still considered able-bodied, to transport them back to Germany. And so they ordered the population of Lodz to report to the substation, train substation of Marishin, which is a suburb of Lodz, and there they would be transported to Germany for labor. That's what the Jewish population was told in the ghetto. And so everybody had to report by the danger that if they don't, they get shot. So there was just no alternative. And so everybody had to report district by district to go to the ghetto, to go to the substation to be taken to for labor. When my turn came, our district was about to leave. My aunt that was with me, and I lived with her because my mom was taken away from me in 1942, and my brother too. They were killed. So I found myself alone with my aunt. And she said to me, David, tomorrow is our turn and we have to turn in and go to the train station. And I refused to go along with that because I made up my mind that I'm going to try to hide in the ghetto because the Russian army was so close to they were already in Poland. They were on the eastern bank of the Vistula River in Warsaw. We could hear in the distance, we could hear the cannons firing and explosions happening. And the front was quite near. And I said to myself, if they're that close, then maybe I should hide out in the ghetto for a day or 2 or 3 or maybe a week. And then the Russians come in and I'll be free. And so I took that chance. Everybody left and I decided to hide in the ghetto. I found a hiding place in an abandoned building away from where I lived on the upper attic there. I tore away a plank from the rafters and there was a hole, a hollow between the rafter and the plank, and I figured that in that hollow I could hide myself, which I did. And so for several days in the beginning, I had to eat something. I had to feed myself. I couldn't show my face. The ghetto was emptied out. I found myself alone. And so I was looking for ways how to survive. So I was scavenging. I was at night raiding those empty buildings. When the people left, they sometimes left little scraps behind them, or scraps of food. And so I lived on that. And after many, many days, I still didn't hear any rescue. I didn't see any movements. The explosions that were prevalent started to become less and less so. And I became disheartened. But yet I found myself alone and in a very dangerous situation. And so one day I went on a bigger periphery and I found a whole potato in one of the abandoned buildings. And I was so happy that I found this because it means a lifesaver. And so I went into where I lived and I tried to cook it. That was the biggest mistake I made because we didn't have gas in our kitchens. We didn't have electricity stoves. We had to heat our food and cook our food with wood, with splinters. And so I did that. And when in the middle of the day, when I lit the wood and the splinters, there was smoke coming out from the chimney. The Germans noticed it. And they converged on that building, yelling with their dogs, the dogs barking. They're saying, Jude da, they're saying, Jude da, there's a Jew there, there's a Jew there, we have to go and get him. They saw the smoke. And I realized what I just did. And I couldn't help myself. So I left everything, the stove, the potato with the pot on the stove, and I ran to my shelter, to my hole, and I hid there. And my heart stopped beating. I was scared to death that they'll discover me and shoot me on the spot. And indeed, they did converge with their dogs, and they came closer and closer, and they came actually to that building, and they already were on the second floor, when all of a sudden a miracle happened because the sirens of the city came on again, very alarmingly. And all the German army knew that was a standing order that if the sirens come on, whatever you do, you turn around, you leave, and you look for shelter. And you go to your bunkers. And that's exactly what they did. They left with their dogs, and I remained in that hole for quite some time, actually till late at night, didn't dare to go out. When night came, I started becoming very hungry again. I dared finally to show myself, and I came out from a hiding place, went back to the place where I lived. But then the next day, I was desperate. I was despondent. I didn't know what to do, what else to do. There was no more food to scavenge. I couldn't show my face. I was in a real desperate situation. And so looking out the kitchen window that morning, I saw a strange sight. People with white clothes, with brooms in their hands, sweeping the sidewalk. And I didn't know what that was. But I was so despondent, I ventured out and I pulled this last man by the coat and I said, excuse me, but who are you? what are you doing here? What's going on? And he said to me, we are the White Guard. And I said, what's the White Guard? And they said, we are the contingent of Jews left behind after the ghetto was evacuated to clean up the mess and to clean up the ghetto so that whoever comes in next should not be able to see the horror that they created. I couldn't fathom this thought, but I said to them as a desperate move, give me a broom, I'll be one of you. So they did, and I became part of the crew, and we started cleaning the ghetto for the next 3 days. After 3 days, they gathered us together, and they shipped us off in a cattle car, supposedly to Germany. And for 3 days or more, I don't remember, and we were in that car squeezed in like sardines, no food, no water, no way to eliminate. It was living hell on earth. And by the time we came to the destination, we were half dead, most of us. And the doors flung open. And on the tarmac, I saw an tremendous amount of German soldiers, SS with dogs, with machine guns. And on the other side of the tarmac, I saw a whole contingent of prisoners in striped clothing. And I thought it was in Germany because that's what they told us that we're going to go. So I said to the man in the striped clothing, I said, excuse me, but am I in Germany? He says, no, you are not. You are in Auschwitz. I never heard of Auschwitz before. So I told him, what is Auschwitz? So he says, turn around. So I turned around. He says, you see the big chimney rising up in the air with the black smoke coming out of it? I turned around and I looked at it and I said, yeah, I see it. What about it? He says, that's where you wound up. That's what he told me. That's where you, and I didn't understand that. What do you mean? Why would I wind up there? This is crazy talk. Nobody ever talked like that to me. It's crazy. He says, believe me, that's where you wound up. Before I could think what was going on, they gathered us together, they threw us on trucks and took us to the actual camp of Auschwitz. That's how I wound up in Auschwitz. When I came in, they assigned us, they deloused us, they shaved our heads, they gave us a striped clothing, ill-fitting shoes that were taken from other dead people that were already killed. And here we were assigned those barracks, squeezed in like sardines, literally. And we had to, this was where we were to sleep and to live. And I could not sleep the first few nights because the sirens were blaring like 24/7, and I couldn't sleep. I was new there. I said to the people that were there before, why are these sirens blaring so often, 24/7, no stop? And he says, these are raids that are being made on the camp all the time. I said, what kind of raids? Well, they're sifting through the able-bodied from those that are no longer able-bodied. Oh my God, I said, do they do this by a list, by a plan? I mean, do they know whom they're looking for? No, no, no. Everything is random. Everything is random. Well, in that case, I could be next. I was scared. And I said to myself, I got to get the hell out of this place as soon as I can, because this is a killing machine. And so I didn't know how to do it. You cannot get out of Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a hermetically closed prison. It was so close that the wires surrounding the prison were electrified. You touch it, you die. And a lot of people did. And there were guards. And so finally, I ventured out on the courtyard because I wasn't assigned a work gang yet. So I ventured out on the courtyard and I looked around. And I was at that time maybe like 16 or 17 years old. I looked around and I saw a long line of men, and I didn't know what that line was. So I approached the man at the end of the line and I said, excuse me, are you staying here to get some food? He says, no, 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 no. We are here to be taken to Germany proper for labor, for work in Germany. I says, what kind of laborers are they looking for? They're looking for people in the building industry, welders, carpenters, metal workers, those kind of things. And I was none of those. I was a tailor. They didn't need me. But I was so despondent, so desperate to get out of Auschwitz. I stood in line anyway, and I said to myself, everybody looks like everybody else. Everybody is clean shaven, everybody is deloused, everybody is striped clothing. I'll just stand in line and tell my fib that I am also the building trade. And to the man, when the assessment in the front of the line was motioning with his thumb to people to go to the right or to the left, that meant that those that were chosen for work go to the right, those that were chosen not to, or to go back to the camp or to die, go to the left. And so I come to the front of the line and I hear everybody in front of me, which were much older than I was, and they were all saying that they were welders, they were carpenters, they were metal workers, they were engineers, they were architects. Okay, so they were taken to work in Germany. When my turn comes, he looks at me, he laughs in my face, and he says, what the hell are you doing? You are just a kid. You still got your mother's milk on your lips. Get the hell out of here. And I said, sir, I'm a carpenter. Like hell you are a carpenter. Get out of here. And he throws me out of the line. And so now I'm despondent. I really am, because I really wanted to get out of Auschwitz. I don't care where I go. And so I braced myself and I said, okay, everybody looks like everybody else. If I go back in line, he probably won't recognize me among all these hundreds of people. So I did go back in line. And for the second time, when my turn came, he immediately recognized me, threw me out and told me, if I see you one more time here, I'm going to shoot you on the spot. I didn't realize it at the time, but this man, this SS man, he was Mengele himself. I found that out later. And so I didn't dare already to go back in line. The people were chosen, and they were chosen in an area that was fenced around from the rest of the people, waiting for transport to Germany. And at that particular time, the next day, I also milled around at the courtyard, and I saw two very heavy set burly men carrying a heavy bucket of soup on a pole. And one has the one end of the pole on his shoulder and the other one in the back on his shoulder, the bucket suspended in the middle. And I approached them and I said, excuse me, but what are you doing here? What's going on? Where are you going with this? And he said, we are taking the food to the kitchen, from the kitchen to the holding area where the people were selected to go to Auschwitz. And immediately when I heard that, it's like a light lit up my brain, and I put my shoulder in front of him under that pole, and I said, the three of us are going to take in the soup, okay? And he was furious. He says, you cannot do this. They knew that only two of us are here, and you are the third one. You don't belong here. And if you don't get out of here, we all be in trouble. And I said, you shut up. Don't say a word, because we're all going to be in jeopardy if you do, in danger if you keep on talking. Just let me walk. And we walked in the holding area. They put down the bucket of soup, and I disappeared among those that were chosen for work. I disappeared among the crowd. I was skinny. I was scrawny. I was emaciated, basically. And I just became a shadow. And after the food was eaten, distributed, the trains came and they stopped loading up those that were chosen. And I happened to be one of those that was not chosen, but is in this crowd. Surreptitiously, I somehow managed to get out from Auschwitz. And so I found myself on the train. I was the very first person on that train, let me tell you. Didn't dare to be the second or the third. I want to be the very first. Didn't take no chances, because I want to get out of Auschwitz. And so I found myself in that train when all the people were counted, and the Germans were very, very precise. They knew exactly there were 200 men. So when the 200th person was counted, the doors closed, and I could hear one voice, one man's voice, screaming in the back. But I was selected. I was selected. I was selected. Didn't help. He was the 201st, and I took his place. I don't know his name, and I don't even know how he looked like. But I took his place. And you know, folks, I was not sorry. I had no pity. I had no remorse. I only wanted to save my life. That is the condition that we were under so many years of horror, that every ounce of humanity was taken out from us. Every ounce of pity, of compassion was taken out of us. All we could think of is how do we survive the next moment? And so we found ourselves on this train, and after many, many, many days and nights, we finally came to the destination in the southern part of Germany, in Bavaria. There, we were taken out from the trains. We were beaten on our way out. Raus, Juden, raus! They were screaming with their dogs and their guards, brutally treating us. And we came out from those cattle cars on the tarmac, and we did not know exactly where we were, but we were in southern Bavaria in Germany, and we were taken to be processed to the infamous, horrible concentration camp of Dachau. In Dachau, they deloused us again. They gave us new striped clothing, ill-fitting shoes. They deloused us with the different sprays, disinfected us, and processed us. And I had to register like everybody else. And I had to tell them my birth, where I was born, where I came from, and all these particular things they needed to know in that form. And I had to sign my name to it by the threat of death if I don't tell the truth. But I instinctively knew that I could not really, a good conscience, write down my real birth date, because I was born in 1927. I would be too young to be considered able-bodied, maybe. So I made myself 2 years older. And instead of 27, I wrote down 1925. And I have that document till the very day. Michael Morgenstern from the museum was kind enough to research and found this document for me. This is the document that you can see. It's unbelievable that I was there in Dachau concentration camp. But from there, we were working in gangs. They took us on a daily basis until they selected groups of people to be taken to sub-camps of Dachau. One of them was called Kaufering. And in Kaufering, there was a cluster of camps that were assigned for men, and another cluster not too far away that was assigned for women. They carved out those clusters of land from from farmland that they may have confiscated, I don't know. But anyway, this is where we found ourselves. Now, those camps were strictly slave labor camps. We were taken every day in gangs to work, to repair railroad tracks, to build bunkers for the German army, to work in factories, ammunition factory, all kinds of horrible, terrible, hard labor tasks. I had to carry 50 kilogram, not pounds, 50 kilogram sacks on my back. I could hardly walk. It just was breaking my back because I was so weak and I was so young and I was emaciated. But that is how people were dying. And I was put in a pit of wet cement with a machine, a thresher that is threshing the cement not to get hard, not to harden. And I had to stand there in that pit for hours on end and thresh the cement. And this was my job. And if I would ever slip, or in any way fall into that cement, I'd die and nobody would know the difference. That is how my life was hanging on a thread every moment of my existence during that time. Eventually, the situation deteriorated for the Germans, and the Allies invaded Europe, and they came from all sides. They came from the west, from the east, from the north, and from the south. And the Russians came from the east in great, great numbers. So did the Americans and the British and the French. And the Germans felt the heat that the defeat is closing in on them. And so they tried to eliminate all these camps, the concentration camps, the smaller ones at least, and sent all the people that were still able-bodied, all the Jews from where they were in the south, to transport them to the north. So they loaded us up again on cattle cars, and they transported us to the north, to Bergen-Belsen. And on the way, about half an hour or so of riding in the car came to a very thick forest, and we stopped right there on that tracks in that forest. There were two tracks, one going north-south, one the opposite direction. Within maybe a half an hour of our standing there, another train, a military train, came from the opposite direction, and they stopped right across from us. Neither train was moving after that, because we didn't know, but later we found out that the bridges on both ends of that road were bombed by the Allies, and so they couldn't go anywhere. So they stood there, and we waited, and we were guarded by so many Germans with machine guns, and we were always told intermittently, don't move, stay in place, don't move, or we'll shoot you, this kind of stuff. And so we stood in place, and then suddenly in the middle of the day, after many hours of being there, in the middle of the day, I hear an incredible roar in the distance. And I didn't know, I never heard a roar like this in my life, because these were the first time that I ever saw jets, actual jets coming on and attacking us from the distance. An armada of jets descending. They saw the military train from the air, and they thought both trains were military. So they descended on those trains. They machine gunned everything and everybody in sight. The locomotives were set on fire. In the interim, because they didn't know that our train is full of prisoners, they thought it was military, so they machine gunned us as well. And so many people of ours, so many prisoners died from that raid. The American forces sent their planes to attack the Germans, and in the process, as a casualty, we suffered incredible losses at that time. And so many of my friends that I knew died in that raid. But when it persisted and they went off to turn around, I said to my friends, my two friends that survived with me, let's jump over. There were no roofs, there were cattle cars. Let's jump over to the forest and try to save ourselves. And we did. And other people did the same thing. And the Germans were yelling at us, they're going to shoot us if we don't stop running or jumping over. But we didn't care how we died. And so I found myself in that forest with many that survived that also jumped over. Eventually, when all the people were jumping and they saw the striped clothing from the air, the pilots, they realized the terrible mistake they made, and they stopped shooting and they went away. But the slaughter was done, the mayhem was already done, and here we were guarded by the Germans in the forest in Bavaria, not knowing exactly where we were. After 3 days of being there, the fourth day we wake up, and the elders among us start yelling to the rest of us, hey guys, there are no Germans left anymore. They're all gone. They're all gone. And we were in disbelief. What do you mean? There were just so many of them just the night before. No, they're all gone. And so we looked around, and indeed there was not one German soldier visible. What happened was they knew something we didn't know. They knew that the war is coming to an end. Germany lost the war. And so they shed their military uniforms during the night. They prepared civilian clothing for themselves. They put it on and disappeared into the population. We were left alone in the desert, in the forest, like sheep without a shepherd. We didn't know where to turn, where we are, what happens next. So after a while, the people started raiding the military train. They found a lot of military food. They tried to open it desperately. There were cans, aluminum cans, very hard to open. We had no means to open them, so they were banging at every hard surface they could find. Some of them succeeded, opened up, and they ate this. And folks, those people that did that, they died within days. Within days, they died. They could not process this food. The body was too emaciated. And so I was lucky enough with my friends that we also had those cans, but we didn't open them up. We had no means. And I said, we'll do it another time later on. And we took it with us. And this is what I witnessed. And so after a while, we decided among ourselves that we cannot stay in this forest much longer. We have to do something. So we created little groups of ourselves, 2, 3 groups, 3, 4 people in a group. I took my 2 friends with me, the 3 of us, and we headed out into the countryside. Just walk through the meadows until you find some civilization or somebody to talk to. And so we did, bedraggled, cold, smelly, horrible, hungry, with a little tin blanket on us. That's all we had on our back. And we walk. And we walk. At the distance, I saw an outline of what looked like a roof of a house. And I pointed to my friends and I said, let's walk towards this area there. There seems to be like a hut there. And so we go closer and closer. And after a while, when we came quite close, we saw a swarm, literally a swarm of military, German military, swarming the area with tanks, with the artillery, with infantry. And I said, my God, I said to my friend, we just walked into a hornet's nest. But we had no way to escape this because the patrol, the forward patrol noticed us and yelled at us, halt, 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 we fight again. Stop, don't go any further. And so he comes towards us and says, wer sind Sie denn und was macht denn hier? Who are you and what are you doing here? And I explained to him in German. I spoke a good German at that time. And I said, sir, this is what happened. We were abandoned in the forest and we are just looking for someone to talk to give us some directions of what we need to do next. And he says, ihr könnt hier nicht bleiben, das ist ein militärisches Gebiet. You cannot remain here, this is a military area. I said, what do you suggest we do? So he says, let me tell you, take it to my commander. So he takes us into the hut. Actually, it was a house, a farmhouse. And when he opened the door, I was confronted by the fattest, most decorated German I've ever seen in my life, full of stars and stripes and all kinds of decoration. And he exactly said the same thing that the soldier just said. He says, who are you? What are you doing here? And I explained to him. And he said the same thing. This is a military area. You need to leave immediately, now. I says, where should we go? He says, go where you came from. So I said to my friend, let's leave. So we stopped walking away, right? And walked away a few minutes. And then all of a sudden, I hear a civilian voice, a man's voice, an old man's voice, coming toward us in German. Halt, Burschen, halt. Stop, stop, boys, stop. I want to talk to you. I'm coming. Ich komme schon dazu. Ich komme dazu. So he's coming towards us. And he says to me, he says to us, he says, listen, I am the farmer of this house. I am the owner of this farm. You come with me. These militaries are leaving momentarily. They leave. This is the front is very near. The war is coming to an end. You come with me to my farm. I'll put you up in a barn, and after they leave, I'll be back and I'll give you better accommodations. So we were baffled by the whole thing. We couldn't understand what's going on. So he took us with him. In a roundabout way, he took us to a side barn, put us up together with the animals, and stay here for a while. And sure enough, the military left, and he gave us a better barn without animals, with much more hay, so we could relax. And then the After about less than an hour, the military left already, and the woman, his wife, came in with a silver tray with freshly baked donuts and a big pitcher of hot milk. And she gives it to us, and she says, "This is for euch Burschen. This is for you boys. You must be starving." Well, what an understatement that was. We were starving indeed. So we haven't seen this kind of food for 6 years. So we devoured it, literally. And then they brought us to a different barn, which they already erected, folding beds for us, with pillows, with sheets, like a human being supposed to sleep on. And they told us that they have outside showers in the farm. We could take a shower. And they brought us underwear from that they had. And by the time we got showered, we put on our new clothing, and we looked at each other. We couldn't recognize each other. We looked like human beings again, different people. And we could not still understand what the heck is happening, because they told us the war comes to an end, but it was just too hard to digest. So for 3 days, we were frolicking on this farm. We were not allowed inside the house, but we were allowed to roam around and to watch all the other workers, the Germans, men and women, doing their work. But strangely, nobody talked to us. Nobody opened the conversation. Nobody told us, "Hey, who are you? Say something to me." Nobody. They stayed away from us totally. And so, but they didn't bother us. And I went in the third day into the outhouse that I had to go. And my other 2 friends were outside. And all of a sudden, I hear rumblings, heavy machinery, like tanks or tractors or something. And all of a sudden, I hear a bunch of voices coming towards me that I didn't recognize. I spoke already Yiddish, I spoke Polish, I spoke German, but this language I didn't know at all. And I'm inside the outhouse when my friends on the outside yell at me, David, come out, come out. We're liberated, we're liberated. I couldn't understand exactly what they just said. It was too much for me to take. So I ran out, and when I came out, I saw a sight that was beyond words. I saw a sight of tanks with insignia that did not look anything like the German tanks. I saw military, hundreds of them, surrounding the farm. They were black American soldiers, a whole battalion of them. They liberated that farm. And I have never, up to that moment, seen a live black person before, because all the black people I knew about is what I learned in school. And that was about the African tribes with the rings in the noses. And this was the kind of projection that they exposed us to in school. And this is all we understood a black person to look like. But here, these soldiers were just like everybody else with American uniforms. And they were so nice. They were so friendly. They just tried desperately to communicate with us, 3 boys. And they tried with their hands, with their faces, with their eyes to communicate. And we tried to do the same, but we couldn't get anywhere because they didn't speak any of the languages we did, and we didn't speak English. And so in this dilemma, all of a sudden, amid the column, emerges a tall, slanky, white officer with a lot of stars and stripes. And he comes straight towards the 3 boys, towards us. And he comes close to me and he says in unadulterated Yiddish, he says, "Ihr Jinger, ihr seid Jiden? You boys, are you Jewish?" And I am just totally flabbergasted. I didn't expect this to hear from an American officer. And I said to him, I said, "Sir," I said to him in Yiddish, "you are an American officer. How come you speak such a great Yiddish?" And he was laughing. He said, "I'm from Brooklyn." Folks, I didn't know Brooklyn from Madagascar at that time. I had no idea where Brooklyn was, but it felt so good that I had someone to communicate with. He took us with him And he said to us, listen, the war is over. Germany capitulated. I am taking you away from here to a displaced persons camp that the American government established in the city of Lodz. You will stay there. You will be taken care of. You'll have all the medical attention. Everything is going to be given to you to restore your life. And you have no longer to worry about the Nazis. They have been thoroughly defeated. And I cannot tell you how those words affected me. I cried, obviously. I cried of joy, of relief. It was such a liberating feeling. It was taken there with my friends, and we stayed in that transit camp, and we were treated royally. Those of us that were sick needed attention. They got all the medical attention they could get. Many were taken to hospitals. And the first thing, after we kind of normalized a little bit, that we could think of, that we were aching for, is to find out somehow if anyone in our families survived the war. I had an extended family from both mother's and father's side of over 100 people. And all I knew at that moment was that I was the only one that survived. I didn't know anyone else. I didn't know my father survived at that time. I found that out much later. And so we decided to look in all the liberated concentration camps, the labor camps in Germany, to go from place to place and to look for clues or for lists or for names or for somebody that can tell us if they knew this person or that person that we knew, so that we could make a contact to see if anybody survived other than us. And after searching Germany for several weeks and finding absolutely nobody, I decided to go to Sweden. Why? Because Sweden opened their doors for the first time in the longest time. They were neutral during the war. They didn't have an immigration policy. They didn't want one up to that point. But now they showed a gesture to the world that they will open their country to 200,000 liberated prisoners for rehabilitation. And they took indeed with the Swedish Red Cross, with ships, they shipped them off to Sweden for rehabilitation. When I heard in the radio that 200,000 people went from Germany to Sweden, I said, if I can find nobody here in Germany, maybe I'll find somebody in Sweden. 200,000 people, who knows? So I did go to Sweden. And I wound up in Sweden with my 3 friends. And in Sweden, we were assigned a place in a transit camp again, a quarantine camp, if you will, because the Swedish people want to make sure that before they release us into society, that we are healthy. So we had to be in quarantine. And so we stayed there, 200 men in a small little town in the center of Sweden, most beautiful place on earth, probably. It was a resort town. And the Swedish government that acquisited a sports place, I think it was a large place where they were housing 200 men. And they're on the other side of that town. They also rented out a resort place that they housed 200 women that were just also liberated. And so we found ourselves in that place. And it didn't take very long for the men in their camp to get wind of that on the other side of town, there are 200 young liberated women. And we were aching to meet them. And I did with my friends. And there I found my wife, my future wife. Folks, I'm going to stop right here. I'm going to let you digest what you just heard. And I thank you so very much for listening.
Thank you so much for sharing your story with us this afternoon. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A box. And again, those on Facebook, you can use the comments section. Can you please share with us some memories that you have of your parents and grandparents from your childhood?
Of course, of course. I was born in 1927 in the city of Lodz to a large Jewish family, I mean, extended family, but my own nuclear family was my mom and dad and my brother. And so the four of us. We had a wonderful life in Poland because the Jewish people, lived in a place where supposedly democracy was practiced, but the population of Lodz was so large, the Jewish population of Lodz was so large, percentage-wise, we were actually like 40% of the entire population of the city were Jewish. And so we had our own tremendous infrastructure, our own synagogues and cemeteries and burial societies and organizations and cultural theaters and all kinds of ways of how we can live and interact and thrive in this society. And I grew up in this atmosphere. My parents were very loving, very caring. They were very strict with us boys, but they also raised us with a very tender heart. And so they imbued in us wonderful values constantly. We were always told stories as we grew up of morality, of right from wrong, of recognizing evil, of those kind of things. And so it gave us a moral compass that I actually was able to take with me throughout my life. And so I have nothing but fond memories of my mom and dad and my grandparents, of course, that I grew up with. Before the war, we were having a good life because my father was a manufacturer and we were going on vacations. We were able to afford the better things to life. I had wonderful friends that were quite also well-to-do with their parents were, and we interacted with each other. As I was growing up, I was going to Cheder, of course, at an early age, learning about Jewish history, about Jewish religion. I knew how to read Hebrew by the age I was 6, because I had to say the prayers. And my grandparents particularly were very, very frum, very religious, and they imbued a lot of the religiosity into my life. I had to always go to shul with them. I had to always pray with them. I had to always enjoy the beautiful holidays we had throughout the year. I was a kid and enjoyed my childhood up to that point. Up to the age of 11, my life was very good. Even though I got to tell you that in this society in Poland, where the majority were non-Jewish people, Catholics, we always felt the sting of underlying anti-Semitism. Sometimes it was very covert, and sometimes it was very overt. Okay, and so we felt that at all times, but being that we relied mostly on each other, and we had such a great Jewish community to rely on, we tried to mitigate that feeling by just clinging to each other, as it were. So I had Christian friends, some, maybe a number of them, but most of my friends were Jewish. And I swam in Jewish waters, if you will. And so I felt very, very good about it. And so we learned how to live with each other. Look, there were many Jewish people that were having business partners that were not Jewish. My own father did. We were relied on clients that were not Jewish. We had to live with these people. We were all the citizens of Poland, actually, but we were citizens that were marginalized. We were citizens as Jews that were discriminated against. There was an anti-Semitism, no question about it. It was there and everybody knew it, and the Jewish people felt it. But we wanted to live in Poland, and so we had to learn how to navigate that anti-Semitism and mitigate it wherever possible. And this is the life I knew in Poland. It was basically good. It was basically loving, caring, with people surrounded by me that cared very deeply about me and I cared about them. And this does something to a child as you grow up. It fills your soul with good feelings.
Thank you so much for sharing. Can you please talk about how you found family members afterwards?
Oh my God. Actually, the only family member that I found was my father and my cousin, female cousin. The female cousin never went through the Holocaust because she ran away from Poland the last minute to Russia, and she survived in Russia. It was very hard survival, she told me, that they had very hard conditions, but she was not subject to the Holocaust. My father, on the other hand, was in the Holocaust, and he was taken away from us in Strykow. He was taken to a labor camp in Poznan Kutno, a very infamous concentration labor camp. They broke 3 of his ribs in the process, but he survived. And after the war, I went to Sweden, I told you. And so I lived there, I got married there, I had my 2 children there first. And in the meantime, my father went back to Poland to look for any survivors, because actually he told us at the time when we were separated that whoever is surviving should go back to look for each other if we survive. And so he didn't know who did, who didn't. So he went back to Poland to look for survivor relatives. He couldn't find anyone there, not anyone. But he found his niece, my cousin, the one that survived in Russia. She came back from Russia. She went up on a streetcar and he descended and she went up, and they met each other this way by sheer coincidence. And so since then, of course, we never lost contact, and I was very close with her. So she and my dad were the only people that survived out of 200.
Thank you so much for sharing. Do you know, somebody asked, where did you find the strength to maneuver and survive when challenged with hideous circumstances from depredation and war?
It is a question that I don't believe can be answered in one sentence or one word, but I will try to be concise. The instinct, the human instinct of self-preservation is so strong in every human being that when you are thrown into the cage of wolves, you are trying desperately with every ounce of your ability, of your mind, to find a way of how to survive. I became very street smart very quickly. I became aware of what to look out for, what to avoid. I became aware the value of becoming invisible, if you will, when necessary. How to keep my tongue, how to acquire food, even at the risk of my own life, which I did in the ghetto. You become so savvy at the skill of survival. And of course, the greatest prerequisite here is the individual person's ability to be resilient and to be optimistic by nature. All my life, whether I knew it or not, I always acted as if the glass was half full rather than half empty. I always looked at it that way. I was always having a hopeful streak in me. And I was saying that I got one life only. And I got to guard that life. I want to live. I want to see the next day, the sunrise. I don't want to cave in. I'm going to be tenacious at my skin of my teeth. I'm going to try to persevere. And I guess this attitude and this ability to become street smart and savvy and cunning, if you will, all this combined, and plus a lot of luck, I got to tell you, a lot of luck played in, and I survived, just like a number of other people did.
Thank you. After you almost were caught cooking the potato, did you get the potato back?
Oh yeah, I was allowed to. This was an incredible incident in my life that I will never forget. As a matter of fact, I wrote a book about my life, about a memoir, and on the cover of that book is this incident when I'm being caught by a German soldier stealing potatoes from a field outside of the ghetto of Lodz. And I decided to do this. I was at that time maybe like 14 years old. Yes, I was 14 years old. I decided to steal in the middle of the night some potatoes that was growing huge fields outside of the ghetto walls. They were grown by Polish farmers, okay? They were growing the land, and there were vegetables sticking out, potatoes, carrots, all kinds of vegetables and fruits were sticking out from the ground. They were there for the taking. And I was starving to death, including my aunt and cousin that I was living with. And I decided to take a chance at my life. And rather than starving to death, I'd rather take a risk of stealing the potatoes to save my life. And I did. I dug a hole underneath the soft ground that was recently tilled. And I was small enough to get under the wire and onto the field. And I had a burlap sack with me that I got from the abandoned building. And I started filling the potatoes into that sack. I was already half full when a reflector came upon me from the tower, the guarding tower. And a soldier directed a rifle at my head. And he says to me, "Verflucht nochmal, was machst du denn hier? God damn it, what are you doing here? Who are you? Wer bist du denn?" And so I pleaded with him, sir, I'm just a kid. I said, I'm starving to death. My mom is dying of starvation in the ghetto. I says, I'm just trying to get some food for us to survive the next day. Would you please not shoot me? Would you please just have mercy on me and let me go and have those potatoes so that we can save our lives? I was pleading with him. And I said to him, sir, maybe you have a son like my age, or a grandson for that matter. He looked like a grandfather to me. See, the Germans didn't employ young soldiers to the ghetto to guard the ghetto. They employed old men or the retired men taken out from retirement, because all the young ones were sent to the front in Russia to fight. And so this man was an old man, and I was appealing to his conscience not to kill me, to let me go. And maybe you have a grandson like me, I said to him. And so, to my great surprise and to my delight at the same time, he lowered his rifle, he turned out the reflector, and he told me, I don't ever want to see you here again. Now, God damn it, take your potatoes and leave now. Never return, or I'll shoot you on the spot. And so he let me go with the potatoes. And it saved my life and my aunt's and my cousin's life for the next 3 months. Unbelievable situation. And this is such an incident that I could never forget, because I put it on the front of my cover of my book that I wrote. Yeah. I'd like to show you that book. Hold on a second.
Thank you. Oh, David's getting his copy, but I was going to show
Oh, you have a
mine.
copy? Okay.
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right, so here it is. This is the book, and this is where I am supposedly, with the German soldiers directing a rifle against my head. It was another incident of a miracle that helped me survive. Now, he could have shot me on the spot, no question about it. But they didn't, and here I am to tell the story.
Thank you so much for sharing. When you encountered German individuals throughout this time, what was your impression? Do you think these people were evil or brainwashed, or do you have any other thoughts as to how these people came to commit such atrocities? And why were the farmers different who you encountered towards the end?
I was what?
The farmers you encountered towards the end, who gave you food, what?
Yeah. Well, okay, so the subject of how come that under normal circumstances, ordinary people can turn to savages given an opportunity and given a situation that is conducive to it, like Hitlerism, and being encouraged by the highest level of government to commit atrocities in the name of patriotism or whatever aim, whatever end they come up with. The ability of ordinary people to become savages and brutal murderers has been spoken about volumes by great minds trying to figure out how is that possible. The fact is, folks, it is not only possible, but it's happening every day in this world. It's happening. People, given the right atmosphere, the right conditions, they will become savages, especially if they feel that they have something to gain by it. I could never reconcile myself with this thought, but the fact is that I witnessed it. I witnessed that our neighbors in Poland, okay, that we were thinking highly of, our co-workers, our teachers, our peers that we looked up to, all these people were collaborating with Hitler during the war. And when the Jews were being raided and robbed and killed and murdered and hung and deported, they were the ones, so many of them, that were pointing a finger along with the German soldiers. Here lives the Jew. Here lives the Jew. Go get him. Here lives the Jew. They were betraying us. They were committing criminal acts against us. And these were the people that we never dreamt had the ability to do this. How devastating this was for us survivors, for us people that were subject to this murder. How devastating. But we learned a bitter lesson, that given the right time and opportunity, and given the conditions that are created in society, ordinary people can become savages. That is a bitter lesson that I've learned, and I will never forget it. The only prevention, the only preventive medicine for this is to have a stable society, to have a democratic process, within which to live, to fight tooth and nail to preserve democracy, because that is the only type of government and governance that ordinary people can remain ordinary and they can utilize their better self. Their better self can come to the fore. And I'm trying to tell those things to anyone that would listen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think that's a good place to conclude. I would like to just share with the audience that David has been active with our museum and our educational programs for so many years now. He's spoken to a countless number of students. And I can just think now of groups of students that you spoke to both in person and virtually. You know, you have shared this message with people who were your age when this happened. You were about 11 or 12 in 1939, and you were 17, 17 or 18 when it ended.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so during these years of your life, roughly, let's say 12 to 18, you've spoken to students who were that age, and you have shared this message with them, the one that you just shared with all of us. And just to conclude, you know, we're so grateful for what you do for our community. I know this was similar to what you had just said. Why is it important for you to keep this story alive?
It is actually very important. It is so, so important, because only by knowing your history, only by knowing what actually did happen, can happen, and why it happened, only by knowing those things can you be part of society that can prevent it from happening again. Only by being aware, only by feeling that when you see evil, you cannot afford to be indifferent. You cannot turn your back on evil thinking that it doesn't touch you right now. It will touch you later. And nobody escapes when evil spreads. It's like a virus, like a deadly virus. It affects everybody. That's why we have to nip it in the bud. That's why we have to know what happened when people were indifferent. The world was mum. They let it happen. They didn't have to do it this way. They could have stood up. They could have protested. There were no placards on the streets. There were no student demonstrations. There were no sit-ins in government buildings. There was no burning of tires in the streets. There was nothing like it at all. As a matter of fact, when the Jews tried to escape Germany in a boat of the St. Louis, they were not admitted anywhere in the Western world, not in Cuba, not in America, not in Canada. Nobody wanted to open their doors for them. They were sent back to their death, knowingly. We cannot afford a world like this to live in anymore. And that is why I'm speaking out. That's why I'm trying to make the next generations aware that this should never, ever repeat itself.
Well, thank you so much again for sharing your story with us today. And thanks to technology, you're able to reach a wide audience, and you even had a viewer in Portugal, according to our Facebook feed. So
Very grateful.
thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Of course, we are so honored to have you as a part of our community, and to be able to share your story and keep it alive. So we thank you so much for everything you do. But thank you to our audience as well. And we have people typing in thank you right now for you. Wishing everybody a happy, healthy, and safe weekend. And we hope to see you at the museum in person soon. Again, you can follow our website, holocaustmuseumla.org, for information on how to make a reservation to visit in person. But we still have our programs virtual for the time being, so continue to follow our website and social media to learn about our upcoming events and programs. We have Holocaust Survivor Talks on Fridays during the summer, so we hope to see you next week. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you. Stay well.